Hello, my name's Alex from the Advent Label Applicator Company, and this is going to be a little bit of a operation video for an Advent 200, our plain paper labelers that are labeling um, these type of pet food cans, metal cans. We have these machines have already been used for this application, and they came back to us in quite a bit of disrepair. And part of it, 90% of the problem was that we switched. The operator started switching to this brick type glue, and the Advent 200s, because of the way that the glue pots are designed, are not really designed to accommodate these bricks. And these are cut down bricks, as you can see. They're actually come a little bit bigger. The adhesive itself was fine, but what was happening is the operator, these are warmed up machines, so would take out the glue pots and then try to fit them in here. And this is probably the maximum size that you could fit, or yeah, the maximum size. The issue is when they would drop it in there in a production environment, they were getting glue all over the place. And one of the key issues of operating these machines successfully and consistently is to keep everything as clean as possible. So what was happening is we were ending up with a lot of glue on the rollers, especially on the rear rollers. And once the glue gets on these rear rollers, which are very close to this glue roller, what will happen is the glue will begin to bunch up as it's pulling it off the glue roller and create a big mess. And once the machine gets glue on it, it becomes very, very difficult to operate the machine successfully. So that was the big issue. What we've done is we've switched back to the original 300C glue. And because the 300C glue is extruded in these small little pellets, it's a lot easier to refill the glue pot. Just grab my right hand. You can see here, it just goes in there very easily. So it's a lot easier to keep things clean, also to make sure that your glue level is good. And that will, using that glue will really make things a lot easier and allow you to keep this machine nice and clean. But again, you do, regardless of what glue, you want to keep the machine nice and clean. And so what I'm going to go over right now is just when the machines are finished warming up, generally the heater's on for about 90 minutes, and it will turn nice and freely. You have that nice high-pitched whine of the motor. And before you start operating, you should just check your rollers and make sure everything's clean. You could take your CCC 509A solvent, saturate a rag, and then you could just quickly clean up the rollers, stainless steel rollers. And just doing that, spending a minute to do that, will really help the operation keep everything nice and smooth. Because again, having a clean machine will allow you to operate very, very easily. Let's see here. Before we go to the individual containers, there was one more thing that we should point out that was also causing a lot of problems for your operators. As you can see here, the stainless steel collars are on the shaft, and the shaft has a flat on it. And we designed that for two reasons. First of all, it allows these set screws not to when it will mark the shafts, and if you didn't have that flat, you would get a burr, and that would prevent the stainless steel collars from sliding left and right very easily. But what also happens is, let's see if I can toggle that a little bit. When you tighten it, what was happening, these machines were being set up and you're moving the collars, and then they were being tightened not on the shaft. And as you can see here, when it's not tightened on the shaft, that set screw comes up past the circumference or of the stainless steel collar itself. And the tolerance between these stainless steel collars and the glue roller is pretty tight. So what was happening is that set screw would start picking up glue off the glue roller. And unfortunately, it didn't damage the glue roller, but it was pulling glue up, and that was creating a big mess. So it is very, very important that when these collars are adjusted, when you're adjusting them, that they be tightened on the flat of the shaft. And you can see when they're tightened on the shaft, they all line up. So it's a really quick, easy visual clue just to see that everything's nice and tight. And do make sure that they're tight too. And of course, when they're tightened up on the flat, you can see they're recessed slightly. So you don't have to worry about that glue being picked up. Other maintenance issues I want to point out, the label feed tires. Depending on the quality of the labels, those have been, get dirty. A really great way of cleaning them is not with the solvent, but either with water and blot them, or what works really well is something like a 409 or alcohol, 409 cleaner or an alcohol pad. What that does is that pulls out the grime, almost like blotting your face, and makes these neoprene rubber nice and grabby again. Okay, so those are the big maintenance. Oh, one more thing. These bearings, the Oilite bearings, were not being oiled. They were completely dry. And it's important that you want to do that at least once a week. That will, especially with, I imagine you have a very, very high volume. So doing that once a week will keep those shafts and bearing blocks in good working condition. And again, it takes less than a couple minutes to oil up those bearings. You just take off the cover of the machine, and then you have an oil point on each shaft. So those are the maintenance issues. Now we're just going to go to the setup. And I'm not going to go into great detail. I think you've been running it fairly successfully. It was just, again, the big issue was the machine not being kept clean. But we're going to send back the machines. One set up for the larger containers. I think they're 14 ounces. And then the smaller container here, I think that is, I don't know how many ounces it is, but let's see. It has the label in Japanese, I can't see. But let's see here. We're going to go with the larger container right now. Let me ask Peter, I think the copy position is that way. Yeah, so it's number 3 here. That's the leading edge of the label. You want to fan the labels slightly forward. And then generally what I do is I pinch it. You can see here, it'll just drop into the hopper, and you can see kind of have it fans back. If the bottom label gets distorted or something, you could just pull that single one out. But you can see that's how a good setup would be. One thing that we did do is we put a hold down bar, because this is a little bit thinner label stock, and I think some of the times you would let these labels sit in the machine too long and they begin to curl up. Putting this additional stainless steel roller will help deal with that curl on those labels. So it's just a feature just to help with your production, your particular operation. So we're going to turn on the machine. Container. Obviously some people do one hand, 2 hands, but generally you want to get it in there. And you can see that label goes on really nicely. Great overlap. And of course we have a skip glue pattern. So you got good adhesion on the leading edge and the trailing edge. Leading edge is usually about 2 inches, and then trailing edge is about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch. This is a thinner paper stock, so it's going to be a little bit on the shorter side. But you can see that label is not coming off unless it's torn off. Again, you can insert. And I'll just quickly review the setup here. So one of the standout features of the 200s that we're able to clear the chimes or the ridges on the container. So the rule of thumb is always to put the rollers on the inside or support the label, match the label width. And then make sure you give yourself at least a 1/4 inch clearance away from the chime. You can see we don't have a roller there, because if it did, it would tilt it and prevent that label from going on straight and tight. So And I think you've been doing that fairly successfully, but we just want to review that. So that's the front, and then the back is even more critical. You can always check your work. You can move a label down. You can just see it as it's coming off the glue plate just before hitting the glue roller. And you just, again, you want to match the width of the label and give yourself a little bit of clearance at the ends. This one's a little bit on the tight, but it will work fine. And then just having a little bit of clearance lets you make the fine-tune adjustments with your product guides, which are just simple thumb locks that you can move left and right. And you do want to place the label usually about a 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch away from the chime. So that gives yourself a little bit of wiggle room. I just want to review that. And then we'll just go ahead and label some of these. You can see, when you, even with a container that's damaged, as long as you give yourself some of that clearance, that label is going to go on fairly nicely. So again, that's one of the really nice standout features of the machine. If you're going to do one hand, try to be even. But the concept is just to let it pull the container into the carriage. Sometimes people will shove it in there. You don't need to do that. It's what I would consider a fairly light touch. Again, really damaged container, but as long as you get the rollers set up fairly well, it's going to work fantastic. And one thing I should also point out is when you set up your product guides, you can see this one has a little bit of clearance. You want to make sure that there's a little bit of wiggle room, because if the guides are too tight, what will happen is the container will bind, because all the heights are not going to be exactly the same. So you have to give yourself a little bit of wiggle room. As you can see here, the overhead pressure arm, this is how it's set up. You know, there's it's sitting on the center line of the container, and there's a little bit of a gap, so you don't have to lift it up each and every time. It just lifts up by itself, and then with that gap, you know that you have the weight of the overhead pressure arm sitting on the container. Allowing it to spin, even though these containers have some good weight to them, it just allows the container not to skip or. That's it. We just labeled all of these containers just like that. Oh, and I should point out the white rollers on the front also have set screws on them. So again, make sure it's not as critical because we're not dealing with a glue roller, but just to avoid burrs on the shaft, do make sure that they're tightened on the flat. So now we're going to go to the other labeler. So this 200 is set up. Let's see here, I believe this is, so again it's the same copy position. You can see our guides are set up a lot tighter. Again, you want to kind of slightly fan these forward. Now these labels, they're a lot more sensitive to the curl. Ideally, they would, I don't know if that's just because it's been sitting around, but ideally they would do a little bit flatter. And this on this machine it was a little bit more critical, or when running this label, this narrow label, it was a little bit more critical to get this roller installed just to help deal with that. I do want to point out on this particular label, I don't know if it was this particular batch, but some of these labels were sticking together a little bit. So again, ideally, if you get this, you might want to fan them forward, thumb them a little bit, and then you can see that top label's beginning to curl from the heat already. So if that happens, you just might want to set those aside. So what we're doing is we're running these labels, and we do need to point out we've been doing a lot of testing, and so they've been in and out of the stack, and it's just really important on this leading edge that you kind of fan or bend these down. Our particular stack was curling up quite a bit. So what I've done is I just curl them down again. So you can see they're kind of facing or angled down. And just grab my stack here. Put it in there. Okay. And that should be pretty good. Alright, so we're just going to go ahead and turn it on again. And you can see it's going to work really well. These narrower labels are a little bit, they're a little bit more sensitive to the heat. So you just have to be a little bit more aware of when you do put it into the stack or to the label hopper that you start labeling them very quickly. If you're going to let that walk away for a minute or two, just take out the labels and put them in towards the back of the machine just so the heat doesn't affect it. And you can see it's doing a fantastic job of putting these labels on. Again, you might get a single misfeed occasionally, and then it could just be a bad curl on that particular label. But you could just put it aside and just keep on going. So we labeled all those. You could go this one. You could just tear it off. Get off that bump right there. And just reinsert it. See there? Went on very nicely. Again, a single label. Turn that off. You can hear me. You can see. Looks really clean. Really well placed. Again, we're spaced about 1/16 of an inch away from that top ridge, which is critical. And you can see. Nice clean edge right there. And that's pretty much it as far as running these containers. Let me try to think here if there's anything else we really need to note. Again, just to review really quickly, when you turn on the machines, let them warm up for about 90 minutes. Check your glue level. Make sure that your rollers are nice and clean. Use the solvent to wipe them down. Again, it takes a couple minutes. And then here we're just noting both setups, but the really good rule of thumb is just to match the width of the label with the rollers. So as long as you do that, you really shouldn't run into any type of problems. And another little thing, a little trick that might be, again, your machines were really, really dirty. And occasionally, maybe once a week, you might just want to check your glue pattern. Maybe if Peter could hold that. And essentially you want to do is you can feed a label by hand. And you can see here, you just grab it as it pops out. Let me turn that off. Put the overhead pressure arm down. And you're not able to grab it to see the leading edge. Too slow to do it manually. But what we're looking for is just checking the color of the glue and the trailing edge and how complete the stripes are. And you can see we got good stripes. There's no breaks. There aren't any stripes missing or anything like that. And then on the trailing edge, you could judge your thickness and again that all the stripes are nice and present. If you're having stripes that are missing or the glue is very, very dark, that's probably a good time to take out the glue pot, remove the glue, put in a new batch of glue, because eventually the glue can char, especially if it's been sitting around for a while. And then when you do that, that's a good time to check your glue roller and see if any small little paper residue has gotten on the glue roller. But ideally, you want all those stripes present, and you want a nice, very pale, almost translucent glue color. So that's pretty much everything that we need to go through on these 200s. Again, keep them clean, and these machines will work really well on this application. If there's any questions, we can always be reached at 800-846-7716. Thank you.